Oh my gosh, Shelley, it's so nice to meet you, and welcome to the Everything Saxophone Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so people are probably wondering if you're watching the video, how foolish we look. We're actually shooting this on March 17th, St. Patty's Day, so we got to get our green on. So we've got our vent vine earrings, and we've got our key leaves. Like, for me, I don't have glasses on, so it's like a little headband, but Shelley's got it for her glasses. Who says saxophone players don't know how to have fun?
That's right, adorned with earrings and everything.
That's right. Cool. This is awesome. So now I'll take this off because I know it's going to fall off. All right. So, gosh, you've written so many books. You're at Wright State University. You're now the director of bands there. Oh my gosh, so many things we have to talk about. Let me start right though from the very beginning, talking about you and talking about your journey as a saxophonist, but as well as a teacher. So when did you get started in music?
Oh gosh, well, I probably started on piano first in third grade,
Wow.
and there's five kids in their family. Mom made all of us play piano, and I said made all of us, which at the time I think we despised her for that. But now, obviously those skills that you get from learning keyboard is so essential to what we do now. So I'm so glad. So if you're listening, Mom, thank you. Sorry to be such a trouble. And then we had band. I grew up on a farm, like a farming community in Saskatchewan, sort of middle of nowhere. I'm pretty sure cows outnumber the people there. And we started band in fifth grade. And so I picked saxophone. And my older sister played saxophone. So when I wanted to also be just like my sister Cindy, she got the new saxophone, and then I got the hand-me-down. But the hand-me-down at that time, was the Vito saxophone, which is a great student horn. And then I think when I graduated the program, my mom donated it to the band program there for some other students who maybe couldn't afford instruments. So that was sort of my experience growing up in band. And and a lot of people have these stories where they knew they wanted to be a band director or musician from an early age, and they have these great stories. I don't really have any great stories because I really wanted to be a vet. That's really what I thought I was going to be. And then when I got to, time to be picking a career, I thought, oh man, a vet takes 7 years of study. Do I really want to go to school another 7 years? Let's do music. I like music. Well, how many years have we invested now in our degrees in music? But I also kind of had a passion for teaching. I mean, I fell in love with teaching right away. And I just felt that, being from a small town, we had a revolving door of band directors. It's hard to keep a good instructor around for a number of years in a small community. And so I just thought, it would be great to go back to a small community and try to stay for a while and give to the community that I think that, these kids deserve to have some kind of continuity. So the teaching thing is really what attracted me a lot.
When did you, when you say you had to make the choice about a career, you're talking like in high school?
Like in high school. So,
got it.
And at that time, in Saskatchewan, there's really only two colleges to choose from. So there's the University of Saskatchewan, which is in Saskatoon, and then the University of Regina. So I went to Saskatoon. It was a little closer. It was about 2 hours from where my family lives. And at that time, Marvin Eckroth was the saxophone instructor and the director of bands. And he was originally from the US. He did his degrees with Frederick Hemke.
Oh, wow.
And so I kind of think nowadays I'm like a little mini Marvin, because being a director of bands and also doing saxophone, I guess I'm kind of following in his shoes.
Wow, that's cool.
So so that's who I studied with in my undergrad. And then my next two degrees were in music education. And although I didn't study privately, a saxophone when I was doing my master's, I did play in the quartet with the saxophone instructor there at that time. That was in Missouri, Columbia, Missouri. And Fred Hemke Jr. was there actually doing some jazz.
Wow.
And and then Glenn Gillis was the classical saxophone instructor. So that's who I played in a quartet with during my time there.
Oh, cool. Now, let me ask you, when you were in, well, we call it elementary school here, but let's say elementary, middle, junior high, whatever, did you have any private saxophone teachers, or did you just learn from school?
Yeah, there were no private saxophone teachers there, but we were lucky to have a lot of good piano instructors. And so a town about half an hour away, my mom would drive us to, and we would take some piano lessons. It wasn't till probably my senior year, grade 12 in Canadian language, that we our band had played at a local contest there, and the adjudicator at that time happened to be Marvin Eckroth, Professor Eckroth.
Okay.
And so one of the other band directors from another town kind of knew of the Jagows and their piano and their musical love for music and whatnot. But knowing we also had a revolving door of directors, he took me aside and he introduced me to Professor Eckroth. And so my last half of my year as a senior, I would drive in 2.5 hours to Saskatoon, and I would take a lesson, with him, but once every 2 weeks. And that was astounding to me. It was eye-opening. Having studied piano and gone along with the whole Royal Conservatory of Music curriculum is what they use in Canada.
Okay.
So it's a very rigorous program, and you do exams, at city placement places that are certified to do that. But as for the saxophone playing, it was just band.
Okay.
So now taking lessons with Marvin really opened up my eyes, and it's like, wow, look at all these things you can do on a saxophone. Who knew? And I remember him giving me CD. Well, he asked me once, he says, where did you learn to play vibrato? I think this is my first lesson with him. And I said, I don't know. I just heard it on the radio once. And so I just wiggled or something. And he says, well, it sounds a little bit like a billy goat, he says. So he gives me all these LPs and he pulls out all these records and sends me home with them. And then he says, just listen to this. And it just opened up my eyes. And I was like, oh, this is way different than how a singer might use their vibrato. And, I could hear the different colors and how the air might be used. And so, there was a lot of habits that I had learned just on my own that I had to unlearn. And it was frustrating, but also a fun challenge at the same time. So I learned a lot.
Wow, that's a great story, and it's actually the testament to using your ears to learn, using your ears and listening to, I don't want to say the right things, but listening to I guess saxophone related music and stuff like that to learn how to do vibrato, as opposed to someone teaching you, okay, you need to make this motion here, and it's like subdivide and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we did those exercises too from the the Larry Till book, where you're doing the wah wah, and but it was really the listening, that oral image, that helped to develop the physical part of it that just worked right too.
Yeah, and this, it's funny, just as an aside, everybody, Shelley and I were talking beforehand, we were talking about music learning theory and stuff, and how the company Meredith Music that publishes your books is now associated with GIA Publications, which publishes all the music learning theory associated books and stuff. And that's what it's all about. It's, it's using your ears. It's ears first as opposed to eyes first.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. There's, in one of the books, that the intermediate studies for developing artists, that was Garwood Whaley is the president of Meredith Music Publications, and he asked if I could. He had something similar for the brass, series, and he said, could you put something together for the woodwind? So I thought, sure, that'd be kind of fun. And that's an exercise I actually put in the saxophone book that I don't see in many of the other method books at that level, for beginner through intermediate. But put some voicing exercises. So just on the mouthpiece alone, where they sing a pitch and then they have to play the pitch. And then there's like little tunes and melodies and things like that, just to get them developing a correct embouchure and developing their ear without really knowing that they are.
This is great. I was going to ask you about that book. So let me take this right turn and go there. So with this intermediate book for saxophone players, with that particular exercise, I do teach the same thing. I have my students absolutely sing the pitch, because if you can't hear it, you don't know what you're shooting for. And if you can't sing it, you're not hearing it. But when you're doing that, well, let me ask this question. When do you have your students, if a student was a very beginner, would you start them off on the mouthpiece, or would you wait until they played a little bit on the horn first?
It depends. I would probably start them out on maybe the mouthpiece and the neck, more so for your own sanity than, than anything. Or tell them, only practice this at home. Don't do it in front of me. And if you have any pets, say goodbye, because they're going to leave. But I think they need to play it first and fall in love with the instrument and just have fun playing, some tunes. But then, I think if I were to go back and start beginners again, I think I would start them out sooner on the mouthpiece than I ever have before.
Okay.
And with the neck and the mouthpiece, and just get them using their air, and you can kind of hear how they're using their air and the speed and the direction or the spin of their air so much more than you can if they have the whole horn put together.
And also too, I would presume as well, with the neck, I work with my students on their articulation, so you don't have the worry of the fingerings and all that kind of thing. You could isolate like articulation, you can isolate the embouchure, you could certainly tune from the neck at that point as well.
Yeah, and especially, that's a great point. Articulation is a great way to hear what's going on if you just isolate it down to the mouthpiece and neck.
Okay, so let me ask you then, in terms of, if I will say kids, but it's not really that. It's so like, people are playing the saxophone. What are the pitches that they should be producing from the mouthpieces? Like, I know tenors concert G, altos concert A.
Yeah, and I include a chapter on that in my other book for band directors, because I think it's good for them to know and do some of these exercises with their students. But I put like a disclaimer in there that if they're a half step above or below, I think that's fine. Some people are very adamant. It has to be this and this only. Jazz players, for example, that I've talked to, because I'm primarily a classical player, but a lot of jazz players will like to actually play with a little bit lower pitch. So classical playing, I like my students on an alto mouthpiece to have around an A. Some are around a B flat and are just fine and can tune just fine and play just fine. Some jazz players like that to even be a little bit lower. They like it to be maybe more like an A flat.
Wow.
Now I know you play jazz. I'm not sure if you have found that you voice a little differently for one or the other or not.
I tend to want to try to nail the pitch right where I think it should be. So in other words, I want to be on that. I want to be on tenor. I want to be in a concert G. I find, and I'm curious what you think about this, especially alto. I find when people are playing an alto mouthpiece, they're really high. They're like concert C.
Yes.
Okay. And then they have a really hard time getting it even close to concert A. And then I start to think to myself, of course, embouchure, also lip position on the mouthpiece as well. But sometimes it's the mouthpiece. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Good. Well, for the alto, again, I do like the concert A, and sometimes it can be they just don't have enough mouthpiece in their mouth. And so having them take in a little bit more, that can sometimes fix it. Strength of reed can have a difference on that as well. But I think mouthpiece especially can have a huge difference. If I'm hearing some students struggle a lot, whether that be with tone or articulating or just pitch, I'll often just, pre-COVID, I would just, hey, can I play on your mouthpiece and, slap my own reed on there. And right away, that would tell you a lot. And so now, if you can go out to the schools and you hear some of that, and you can pretty quickly take a look at his students and see that they're on a stock mouthpiece, and you hand them, a professional quality mouthpiece and say, use your same reed, use your same ligature, just switch out your mouthpiece. And their eyes light up like, they're discovering ice cream for the first time. It's just like, this is so easy. I sound good. And, and that's one of the things I'll try to, as a band director teaching high school, I would try to convince parents that buying a new saxophone or a new clarinet, or that's you're looking into thousands of dollars of an investment to upgrade to a professional horn. But for a couple $100, look at the difference a mouthpiece can make. And I used to, then I would take it from my Selmer, Series 2 horn, and then I would take just a student horn, but switch the mouthpieces and put the stock onto the pro horn, and it would be sound, but that quality mouthpiece could sound great, whether it was a student horn or a pro horn. And so, like, please, if you can't invest in a pro horn, spend a couple $100 and make your life, much easier for your ears if you can get a good mouthpiece.
Okay, now that's obviously going to lead to this next question: is which mouthpiece do you recommend?
Well, I'm playing on a few different ones actually right now. I like the Selmer. For years I played on the Selmer C Star. S80 is what Marvin had me play on, and I played on that one for quite a long time. I like the Selmer Concept. Now I especially like the Selmer Concept for soprano.
Okay.
For whatever reason, I've always struggled with a little bit of a bubble, like down in the low register on the Selmer horns, on the Selmer soprano horns. Yamaha, for whatever reason, I never had a problem with, but somewhere down in that low register of the soprano on the Selmer. And I find that using the Selmer Concept mouthpiece just has really, that problem's just disappeared. It's just fixed it. Whatever the acoustics of it, I can't explain it, but I like that. The other mouthpiece I like on alto is the Profile, the Van Doren Profile. And that's very similar, I'm finding, to the Selmer Concept. Similar, well, they both have the circle, opening bore in there, as opposed to the original Selmer mouthpiece that had more of the square chamber. So I find it's just a little warmer, a little bit easier to project. I especially like the Profile in the low register for ease of projection. I find it works really well down in the low register. And then the AL5 Van Doren, I also really like. It's maybe a tiny bit brighter, maybe a little bit more open, I find, than the Profile. But I like its flexibility, depending on what repertoire you might be playing as well. And then the AL3, that's just a win-win for band directors. Put your kids on an AL3.
Wow. Okay.
I just find that it's a easy mouthpiece to get a good warm sound on. It will blend well as a section. So some of these bands that have 15 saxophones in their section, if they could all be on a Van Doren AL3, I just really think it brings them into the same room with regards to blending their tone and finding some balance in your saxophone section.
Okay, two questions. Do you feel that mouthpiece would be good? Because for high schools, kids are going to be in concert band, wind ensemble, marching band, jazz band. So would that mouthpiece or the AL5 be suitable for that? And do you feel that, because some kids, that mouthpiece may not work for them, so like, are you a stickler for everybody playing the same mouthpiece or?
No. Yeah, I've never been a stickler. I just, and my students, if you ask them, they might say, I said, if you come in with a Fisher-Price mouthpiece and you sound great, I'm okay with that. So, as long as they sound good and they can play in tune and, they can, shape a phrase with some nuances, then you're good to go. With that said, probably most of my college students, we play it. It's either Selmer or Van Doren. Now, when it comes to playing jazz, I think some of them will play on, I mean, there's so many jazz mouthpieces, and that certainly isn't my area of expertise. But I know we have some V16s at the school that some of the students will play on, and then a lot of them will purchase their own, like a Morgan or a Meyer or Jody Jazz and things like that. I think for a middle school student, playing on the same mouthpiece is probably not a bad idea, whether it's pep band, jazz band, or concert band. Once they become pretty mature and have really developed their embouchure and their tone, then I think it's okay for them to start exploring into different mouthpiece reed combinations for different gigs. Marching bands, for example, outside, you might want something a little bit more open and bright, and slap on a Leger reed or something that they're not going to break as easy. And but I would prefer them to have a cane reed for quartet playing or solo playing.
Right. And actually, I'm glad that you mentioned the Leger or even just synthetic reeds, because, certainly in different parts of the country, and also especially in Canada where it gets so cold and stuff. I don't know what the marching band tradition is where you grew up, if because of the weather. I mean, I don't know how you could even.
Yeah, I was going to say, we didn't have marching band.
I can't even imagine.
It's hard to play our instrument on skates.
I can't even skate. Forget the instrument.
There you go.
That answers that. So let me ask you this question. When it comes to like someone just starting out in their instrument, right? They've got the stock mouthpiece. When do you suggest that they start to move to that next mouthpiece? Like I usually put people on a Yamaha 4C fairly quickly, but any thoughts, suggestions for people, but also for teachers, who are teaching either elementary or middle school level, and what should they be looking for to know when to change?
Yeah, that's a good question. The probably the most popular ones in the schools are the Yamaha 4C, but the other mouthpiece that I'll sometimes recommend to directors, if they can't quite afford a Van Dorn AL3 or something like that, as the Phobes debut, which I had never heard of before till I started actually moved to Dayton, and I was teaching here, and a band director called me up and he said, "What about this mouthpiece?" I'd be, "No." "What about this mouthpiece?" "No." "This one?" "Yeah." And he says, "What about this one?" I said, "Never heard of it." And he says, "Well, I'll send it to you." They sent him one to try, and so I tried it. And it's a very cheap mouthpiece. It's a student mouthpiece. But of all the stock plastic student mouthpieces that I played on, this one had a more genuine evenness of tone from low to high, which you just don't get. I mean, any mouthpiece can kind of sound okay within a perfect fifth in the middle of your horn, but you start going, above or below that. So that's another one I'll recommend to some schools that are maybe just very limited in funding. The other issue that directors can consider is when I was teaching band, I used to, instead of the mouthpiece that would come in the clarinets or the trumpets or the saxophone cases, I said, can we add this particular mouthpiece in and pull out the stock mouthpiece, and let's throw in, at that time it was like a Selmer C Star, and they said, yeah, we can do that, and the rent will be an extra $1.50 a month. I was like, let's do it. So that way, the students and parents don't really know, and they're kind of set up for success right from the beginning if you just have a good quality mouthpiece in the rental case.
That's smart. Wow, that's a great idea. And there's in the States, there's companies like Music and Arts where you can have a rent to own. And I remember when I was teaching in Syosset, New York, I was giving my suggestions for the brands of instruments that I wanted the kids to be able to rent. So Yamaha was definitely one of them, Con Selmer was definitely another one. So you'd have those types of mouthpieces in there, but that's a great idea, especially if they don't have a music and arts program near them, or I guess company near them.
Yes. Yeah. Something else, I taught for a year in Missouri after grad school, and which was my first teaching experience in the US in the public school system. And it was a fairly, you know, disadvantaged community. I mean, not having the same funding resources as some of the larger cities. And I knew that a lot of the students just couldn't purchase a better mouthpiece. So I went to the school board and did a little pitch as to, hey, you know, you buy all their basketballs and baseball bats and everything else. So how about we buy these mouthpieces and we'll check them out to the students like a library book, and they're there to take care of them, and we'll check them back in and clean them and sanitize them at the end of the year. Or they can have the option of buying them if they have the money to purchase it at the end of the year, save up for it. So that changed my life, having, you know, being able to put all those students onto the same quality mouthpiece. And as you know, I think it makes a much more significant difference to do that for your woodwinds than it does brass.
Oh, sure. Yeah, for brass, you know, most of us will start off on a Bach 7C or the equivalent of that.
Right.
And yeah, you shouldn't, okay, this is not like a general, you know, you shouldn't, but, you know, for most people, that mouthpiece will work for a number of years until you get to, you know, like later middle school where you may, in terms of Bach numbers, go to like a Bach 5C. I went from a 7 to 1.5C because I modeled the, one of my friends who was a year older, and, you know, whatever John did, I did. And I shouldn't have gone to 1.5C. I probably should have gone to like a 5 or a 3. But yeah, you can go pretty far on a 7C mouthpiece for sure. But woodwinds, it's definitely more temperamental.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Let me ask you this question, because we're talking mouthpieces and stuff. Oh yeah, I forgot. So soprano pitch on the mouthpiece.
Yeah. Soprano's pitch is around a C.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
C by the staff, which is the same for soprano clarinet.
Got it. And then
on mouthpiece alone.
Okay, and then for Barry, we were talking before, Barry's usually between a D and an E flat.
Yeah, and I think I have D in my publications, but half step above that would be fine too.
I think it was so interesting too how you said, you know, like I've read, you know, from a majority of sources, oh, you have to get that exact pitch, you know, the suggested pitch on the mouthpiece. But again, like what I found with alto players, they're always higher, you know. And one of the things I found too, and maybe you found this as well, especially like with an alto mouthpiece, what people tend to do is they don't have their mouth lined up. It's usually like that the top teeth are too close to the tip and the bottom jaw is too far towards the horn, and they wonder why they have jaw problems.
Yeah. That's almost, you know, sometimes when I see that, those are kids that have maybe sometimes transferred from clarinet sometimes too, I find.
Right.
That they feel like it's like too much in their mouth, and they kind of pull back with their top teeth, but yet they're still putting in enough underneath in order to get that reed to vibrate, but not always. Yeah. I've noticed that on some transfers.
Yeah, for sure. And I just know that it causes, it's not even just a question of matching the pitch on the mouthpiece, but it stifles the sound, you know, it causes problems with articulation and all that type of thing. Have you found that too?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So now mouthpiece neck, there are, you know, suggested pitches for that. And that has to be more, that has to be actually what it is. So like, you know, on tenor, it's concert E and stuff like that.
Yeah. So the pitches, at least I'm cheating here. I'm looking at my book to make sure I'm not lying. But for alto sax, I have G sharp with the neck, and then E with the neck on tenor.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I've got the clarinet ones as well. I think it's F sharp if you add the barrel on soprano clarinet, and then add the neck on bass clarinet is a C sharp.
And remind me for soprano sax and for Barry sax, I can't think of it off the top of my head in terms of the neck pitch.
I don't have that one in here, and there must be a reason for that, but I don't know.
I think I will. Yeah, if I'm remembering right, I think with the Barry, it may vary also. Although it probably shouldn't. I'm going to make a mental note. Actually, I'm going to make a note right now and I'll put this in the show notes, everybody. I'm saying suggested pitch, but when it comes to the neck, it really isn't suggested. And you know, I know from some of my friends who build instruments that you tune from the neck.
Yeah, I was going to say there's not a lot of variance on the neck. You'll get what you get. On a mouthpiece is where it really separates the men from the boys, so to speak, you know, and what you're able to control with your embouchure and voicing, because it's very much like playing a tuning slide, and you can get a lot of different pitches on just the mouthpiece. But you slap a neck on there, yeah, because I think there's 3 different pitches on the alto neck that you could actually be practicing for overtones, right? I
Yes.
think, yeah, I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but that's another good exercise.
Yes, absolutely. I have my students doing those types of exercises after, you know, not right away, but after they've you know, like developed, they're comfortable with their embouchure setting.
Sure.
But in terms of, you know, like in terms of tuning now, because you also wrote a book, Tuning Tips, okay, which people are going to be really interested to get. If you could give us like one tip that like every saxophone player or band director should know when it comes to tuning saxophones, what would that be?
Here's a couple things. With beginners, I would put a pencil mark on their cork of their neck, because students will, you know, clarinet, it's not an issue, you know, just tell them to push all the way in for right now. But on saxophone, they'll be way out on the end, or they think they need to cover the whole cork. And, you know, we're talking, you know, up to a major second difference that you could be getting in your saxophones. So I would mark on the cork where, you know, just take your own mouthpiece and play on their horn and just kind of mark it where they should be putting it. And that'll help. The other thing too with some of those beginner horns is checking the cork, because we'll often ask the kids to pull out, and like, oh no, you need to pull out, lengthen your horn, but the cork is so compressed that it just slides back in again, or it's a brand new cork and they're like, you know, this is as far as I can get it on, and they still, you know, well, I'll sand that down for you. Don't have your parents do that. I'll do that for you. So that's one thing to look at least be in the same ballpark with beginners. And then just intonation or tuning in general, I honestly really don't touch on the topic a lot until they've really developed a mature characteristic tone. Because I think it's moot. You can't play in tune until you can play in tone. And one of the other things that I'll tell my parents is, or my students would tell you, is I'll say, okay, what's the number one priority as a saxophonist? And they'll say, I hope they would say, tone. I'm like, great. What's their second priority? And they would say, tone. I said, and the third priority? And they're like, okay, I get it. So once we can get, you know, that good characteristic tone, then we can start doing some pitch exercises. And, you know, every instrument has its certain inherent tendencies as to, you know, how it plays a little bit flat, a little bit sharp. Every brand is a little bit different as well. But some of the ones that are a little bit more, you know, across the board on saxophone, and I would maybe do this differently going back teaching band again, is the open C sharp. And still in all the method books, it's still written as an open C sharp. Yeah. And, you know, of all the horns, unless you've got a 5th grader, 6th grader playing on a, you know, a Selmer series 3 where they put on that extra hole, you know, to fix that venting, which I doubt you are going to have a kid on that instrument in beginning band. I would teach, especially in slow passages. This is the fingering for a C sharp. Let's write this into your book by adding, you know, our octave key and our 3rd finger of our left hand. And because, you know, the other one that I can remember as a kid growing up in high school is when I got to college and started taking lessons on the saxophone, the D sounded terribly out of tune to me. Yeah. The D on my horn was like so super sharp. But I had just grown up with hearing it that way because that's the way I fingered it. And, you know, then Marvin's like, no, you had your low B here. And I was like, oh, that sounds so wrong. But it was right because I was so used to hearing it the wrong way. So that could be another fingering that you could teach as, you know, depending on their horns. could maybe be considered, this is kind of a, even though it's an alternate fingering, this should be your first priority or first choice fingering in slow passages or sustained passages. Now, if you're playing a scale or something fast, then use open C sharp or just use your regular D and things like that. So those are kind of the basics that I like to share with directors that they should know to help their students develop the right habits from the beginning and know that what those notes need to be to sound in tune.
That's awesome. And it's interesting. I've not heard of that C sharp fingering before. I know about C sharp with the octave key can be insanely sharp for some people. And so what some people do is they add their right hand to it, and that kind of helps, lower the pitch. But I didn't know about the third finger plus the octave key.
Yeah. So just adding that in, it just really helps to bring that up. Yeah.
You know what I wanted to ask you too? Have you heard of like tuning from the neck, where like the one question, one of the questions that I have, or that I've noticed, I should say, is that I noticed with a bunch of students where, and it could be that they just don't have the right mouthpiece for them, but they're in tune on the neck, or they find the spot where they're in tune on the neck. They put the neck on the horn, they're not in tune anymore. That concert A flat on an alto is not matching a concert A flat on the horn. And I don't know if you've seen that before, or any suggestions that you have for the listeners.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've not really experienced that myself with any students, but again, I if I did experience that, I would probably go back to seeing what they're getting on the mouthpiece itself, and diagnosing from there, like just matter of elimination, to see if they've got the right piece, right pitch on the mouthpiece, and then with the neck combination, gosh, then it would have to be some mysterious horn issue would be the next thing I would go to. I have had some issues sometimes with that little airy hiss you get sometimes when you're playing that high A
Yeah.
especially.
Yes.
And I have found, for whatever reason, sometimes just switching a neck out on a student's horn can sometimes help that. My teacher used to put like a little piece of tape that would cover a little bit of the pip of the octave key pip.
Wow. Okay.
I know some people are putting on will stretch the pantyhose across it, and then they'll glue it on permanently. I haven't been that brave. I haven't done that.
Well, have you heard of, and I don't have it handy, Le Freak, which is, it's you know what I'm talking about. It's a device that helps to, helps enrich the harmonics of the instrument, and in some cases eliminates some stuffiness for some of the pitches. Have you heard of the Le Freak?
Yeah, is that, it's like attaches on the neck to the mouthpiece, right?
Yes, it's like two metal plates, and then there's like a fancy rubber band system where you could attach it in various ways. Not just for woodwinds, it's for brass players too. Like trumpet players have found huge benefits from using it.
Well, yeah, I haven't. I've been interested in getting that and trying that a little bit more, but I really haven't spent much time with that, so I need to do that.
Okay, yeah, it's interesting. It's funny because all the people that, I just spoke to somebody yesterday about this, all the people that recommended the Le Freak were classical players. And I was shocked. I didn't realize that, I thought it was the jazz players that are so into the gear and stuff. And no, it's the classical players that are really into gear.
I've heard that they like it too for, I have a former student that uses that, and he really likes it for overtones and the, altissimo. He just says they just speak with a little bit more clarity and ease by using that.
Interesting. Yeah, I used it for a while, and then I actually just stopped using it. I'll have to bring it out again and test it, and test it for that. I never even thought of using it for that. It was, I definitely did notice a difference for sure. So it was kind of interesting. Now, so we've talked about some tuning tips, right? We talked about, like mouthpieces and stuff like that. Let's talk about, you again, you have so many books, and I'm going to put the link I'll certainly put the link for your website, shelleyjagow.com. And that's going to have a link for your books and everything as well. But common misconceptions that band teachers would have in terms of teaching woodwinds, in particular saxophone players. What do you think some of those common misconceptions are?
I'm not sure it's a misconception, but it can be fixed. And one thing is, the saxophone is the easiest instrument to play, but it's also the easiest instrument to play badly.
Yeah.
You know, and and I'll have some directors ask, like, oh my gosh, they just play so loud and it just honks and does this and that and that. And so one of the things to get beyond that, I think, is when we talked about mouthpieces, and it just get a better mouthpiece in their kit right away. Get them off the stock mouthpiece. Another thing too, especially if it's a really large section, and they're just trying to find that good tone on a saxophone, and the saxophone has so much more flexibility than a clarinet does. Your clarinets, they'll all be playing in some different variants of pitch, but it doesn't have the flexibility as a saxophone does. And so I will find that it just sounds like a foghorn sometimes, the saxophone section in younger bands. And so get them on a good quality mouthpiece. Mark on their neck where the mouth piece should be, how far in or how far out. And then I'm not a huge synthetic cane. I find there's points to using the synthetic cane reed. And this might be one of those points, is with your beginners. They have so much that they're going to be worrying about. Is I would maybe put them onto a synthetic reed, because then you're not worried about, is it the reed's problem? And the reed's usually chipped or it's not centered properly, and the kids, that causes them to overblow. And then as soon as the kids overblow, they get a bad sound. And it's easy to overblow on the saxophone. So putting them on a synthetic reed, I find, also helps tame their tone a little bit. And that can help them to start listening just a little bit better. As for, I like the cane reed more for quartet and solo playing. I just feel like it has, you can get more, you can ask more from it. You're more in control of it than it is in control of you.
Yeah.
And just, more nuances and more, there's certainly more frequencies and harmonics that you can pull out of a cane reed than you can out of a synthetic.
Well, speaking about that, what would you recommend then? And it's funny, I was going to ask you, okay, we talked about mouthpieces and stuff. What reeds would you recommend? And here's the thing too, synthetics are definitely more expensive than cane. So that's also an issue to think about as well. But what would you recommend in terms of synthetic, in terms of maybe brand, but also strength, but also if some directors give students reeds, so they're going to be giving them cane reeds. So what would you recommend?
Yeah, I like the Van Doren reeds. I've played on lots of different ones. I've tried them all just because I wanted to, have the knowledge and be able to speak educationally about each of them. But I always come back to the Van Doren, hands down, for my playing anyway, and classical playing. And I like the blue box, the traditional, and the V12s. I like the V12s a lot, especially if I'm playing a little bit more French music or heavy Hindemith kind of stuff. I like the V12s. I find they're just a little meatier, a little thicker in the heart, and I just like that darkness. I can get a little bit more darkness out of the V12 than I can the blue box. But the blue box also works, all around really well for me as well.
What about strength? So let's talk, like beginners to middle school to high school, any like misconceptions in terms of strength also.
Yeah, that's thanks for asking that. Sometimes I'll go out to school and do clinics, and it's like, you're playing on a 2, I have a 2.5. Yeah, well, I'm on a 3. I'm going to go buy a 4. I was like, okay, hold on here. and I think that they think the higher the number, the better player they are. And some teachers, if they're not a woodwind person, sometimes forget that as well. So I like to recommend that a beginner starts on a 2, 2.5. And then by your second year of playing, probably be on a 3. into high school, clarinets are usually about a half strength higher than a saxophone. So maybe your clarinets are on a 3.5, maybe some on a 4, but generally a 3.5. And saxophonists, I think, mostly stay around a 3, depending, there's some that have a little bit more success on a 3.5. It all depends how much they play, or, their embouchure, things like that. And I pretty much use the same strength across the board, except for soprano, I will sometimes use about a half strength harder. I find
Interesting.
on the soprano, it helps in the upper register a little bit, just to voice those. Otherwise, I sound like a trombone up in the. it just kind of slides around up there.
So in a sense, though, when you think about it, it's like you're almost treating the soprano sax like the clarinet in the sense where it's a half strength.
Yes.
Stronger.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never thought of that. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, so glad to help. No, actually, and this is totally off in left field. I know for me, I do use synthetic reeds, but if you were to, I'm not going to go in left field. I wanted to ask this question. Synthetic reeds for beginners. I know for oboe, I absolutely start them on synthetic reeds for sure. But, if you're dealing with, let's say, saxophone players, what, if there was a brand, and what strength would you, because synthetic can feel harder, and it is the reed, it's harder to control that synthetic reed.
Sure. Yeah. And I would be lying if I said I've never used a synthetic reed, because I have. For classical playing, I like the Legere. I think it's the closest one I've come to that actually replicates the sound and feel of a cane reed. A lot of the earlier versions of synthetic reeds, I think, they tended to have some dysfunctional squeaks and honks. They're pretty bright and hard to control. I find that the Legere, you can still have some control over. And I've used them in outdoor concerts. Like I play saxophone in the Dayton Philharmonic Concert Band. That's a summer group that meets. And I often will, sometimes, depending on the weather, I'll use them outside. Oh, yeah. If I'm playing, in a symphony orchestra, which, those are rare for saxophone every now and then, but when it does come up, you're usually playing more than one instrument. So it's nice to just be able to pick up, the soprano, and know that you only have 2 measures to get the reed wet and working for you. But if you have the Legere on there, it's just like brings down your anxiety level a lot. That, okay, I know it's going to speak. And I've also used it. I will recommend it sometimes for the students in the bands on bass clarinet and bari sax and sometimes tenor sax. I find, if they're having a lot of trouble with the reed and they're just not that comfortable yet with the instrument, it works just fine in a large ensemble situation by having your bass clarinet or bari sax tenor player playing on a synthetic Legere. I like the Signature.
Okay, yeah. So the Signature, and would you say like a 2.0 strength or something, or?
Yeah, I'd say I find probably about a half strength lower than what the cane reed would be.
Okay, yeah.
And then I do find that after you play on, if they keep playing the same one after a while, it will weaken, and so they may need to. But that's a good thing too with Legere. They have quarter sizes, so you can, student will kind of play around till they find out what kind of works best for them.
Yeah, and I actually have interviewed people from Legere for the Everything Saxophone podcast, and one of the recommendations that they do have is you should still, it does wear over time, and it is a good idea to rotate, just like you would with cane reeds as well. I guess the hard thing would be, if you're working in a district where students don't have the money to spend $30 on a cane reed, on a synthetic reed, although it will last you longer than cane reeds for sure. It's, that could be a hard pill to swallow, putting out $30 for, $60 actually for 2 reeds if you're going to rotate.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be the hard thing. But, in terms of, like flexibility and being able to play in all different types of ensembles and also all different types of weather too, I think synthetic reeds are really the way to go for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Great. So let's talk about some of the clinics that you, well, pre-COVID, that you've done, for Con Selmer and, for actually for the books that you have as well. Let's talk about some of those.
Yeah, I've been real fortunate with the different people I've met throughout my career, and um, putting these books together has made my life a little bit easier because then everything's in one place, and it's helped me learn a lot. And so with Meredith Music, oftentimes, conferences especially, will like you to go out and do some clinics and topics on the book, and just tips and tricks for band directors. Um, Going out to schools sometimes, like Con Selmer's great at educational clinics and will help sponsor. So if there's some schools that maybe have a 2-3 day festivals type thing, and Con Selmer will help sponsor different clinicians to go in and work with their bands and with their sections and things like that. I think they helped last year with, have you heard of the Athena music camp?
No.
I hadn't either until, was it just last year? Maybe 2 years ago now. And it's for young women only. And it's a music and leadership camp. And I think it was founded by Myra Roden. She's a band director in Georgia. Terrific lady. I just met her for the first time doing this camp. Well, it was Con Selmer that she partnered with that helps sponsor these clinicians. And so I had gone up to St. Cloud, Minnesota, where this particular camp. So I think it was founded in Atlanta, and I think they have one in St. Cloud, Minnesota. I should know. I think there's a third location they have, maybe Chicago now.
Oh, okay.
And it's called Athena. So it's all, pink t-shirts, you name it. And, it's all these young women and all women instructors. So there's an honor band led by a woman, female conductor. And so I went out and did the saxophone section and played a little recital. And that was all sponsored by Con Selmer at this particular workshop.
Wow, that's a great resource. I wasn't even aware of that. So thanks for letting us know about
Yeah, it's
that.
great.
Excellent. And so you've also, I'm sure, gone to like I'm from New York, so it was NISMA, so New York State School Music Association, so like the yearly conventions and stuff like that.
Yes, yeah, and I've actually been to NISMA. I've done that one a couple times, and of course our local one, OMEA, for the Ohio, and so yeah, I've been around to a lot of conferences in the U.S. and in Canada, just usually stemming from topics from some of the publications. That's for sure.
And actually, you know what? I wanted to speak also about one of your publications was many of your publications, of course, are for band directors, but we had alluded to before that common problem when you're trying a mouthpiece on a saxophone neck, right? And the cork is too compressed, and then the mouthpiece shouldn't be so far down. What do you have a tip to help people uncompress that cork, so to speak? I mean, people can put plumber's tape on for sure, but
yeah, I was going to say for a short-term solution, if it is too compressed, I can wrap it in some tape, or just even take a piece of paper and slide that on. We'll get you through a concert or a rehearsal, but essentially they're going to need to get the cork replaced on the neck and a new cork put on there. And then that's tricky too, because now it's so thick, it's got to remind them to, make sure you're putting cork grease on this every day for the first couple of weeks, and then every other day for the next couple,
yes.
And even then you may need to sand it down a little bit, depending on what they're using for a mouthpiece, because that chamber size can change a little bit too.
Absolutely. And then in terms of like, band director, and again, this would also apply to players as well, but, any other like quick tips in terms of like emergency maintenance, so to speak?
Yeah, that's good. You should always travel with duct tape and rubber bands, that's for sure. Some of the other, sometimes if a spring or a pad falls out, if it's in a key that you might not use, that like a younger repertoire, for example, you may just have to tape that whole key down, put the pad back in and tape the whole key down. Otherwise it won't, it won't seal properly. I've done that a few times in clarinets and saxophones, where you've had to just tape it down till you can get through the concert. Or broken springs, sometimes there's some things like that. Carry extra ligatures with you. And the Rovner ligatures are great because if you step on them, they're not going to break.
Yes.
And most of the kids will step on their metal ligature and then they just like, oh, that's okay, I'll just put it back on. But it never will ever hold it centered or straight again. It's always going to be, budging that reed a little off center. Carry extra mouthpieces, because if somebody drops a mouthpiece and they have a chip, you can pull another one out of your pocket. Get the kids in a habit of taking extra reeds on stage with them or to rehearsals, so they're not, especially in rehearsals, like, oh, I need another reed, and they'll leave the room. Like, no, just have your case, take your case with you, and have that with you, and making sure that you're rotating them so they're going to last a little bit longer as well. The other thing that I find too is so many players, especially in younger groups, they'll say, I can't, I'm trying so hard and my teacher says blow warm air, but I keep only getting the upper octave. I can't play low on my horn. And 99% of the time, it's usually just because of that octave key is just a little off. And it's an easy bend. I'm not sure if I explain it right. You know what I'm talking about, but
yes.
Where sometimes it's just, you can't even see it with the naked eye, but it's leaking a little bit at the pip. So you're just making sure that cork on the neck is sealing on the pip. And it's so easy to check that, just squeeze it and say, okay, try that note again. And if immediately it works for them, then you know that's the issue. And that's an easy fix that students can do themselves, or directors, that you don't have to be without your instrument for a week while it's sitting in a repair shop for something that simple.
Absolutely. And, another common issue that people have is they can't get the low notes to come out. Now, sometimes it's definitely a pad leak, in the C key or the D key. But do you have any tips with regard to, I guess, that for saxophone players? And not even a question of them being like total beginner players or anything like that, maybe intermediate level.
Oh, yeah. In fact, this is something I work on with a lot of incoming freshmen, is just playing. And if they can play low, it might not be with the best tone or at a very controlled piano volume or lower. And so I think that's an experimentation of just having the right reed and mouthpiece combination, working on mouthpiece pitch. Sometimes I find if they can't play low, their embouchure's too tight. And they're usually playing at around a C or, a B or something like that instead of a B flat or an A. I find if I can get them down to an A on the mouthpiece and do that consistently for even 5 minutes, and then I'll say, okay, now sing another pitch, now come back. Can you hear that A? Play that A on your mouthpiece. And once they can do that a little bit consistently, I say, okay, there. Now put it all back on your horn, but pretend you're playing just on your mouthpiece and you're playing that pitch A. And all of a sudden, their low tones will work for them. But, so that's just kind of a reminder of where the embouchure and air needs to work together to make that happen.
And just to remind people too, that we're talking alto right now. If it was tenor, it would be around the concert G, and the other pitches that we suggested before. That's great. That's a great tip. I never thought of it in terms of that way before. I wanted to touch upon, I'm going to now take a different turn for a second. This is a conversation we had before we went on the air, so to speak, because this is going to deal with COVID too. So schools are starting to open up. You had mentioned that you are seeing small groups now at Wright State, and some other colleges are starting to do that as well. How are you handling this as a director of bands, or as any band teacher, or even people that are listening, to the show, they're in community bands, they may be curious, what can they do to feel safe, even if they've gotten vaccinated? What are some things that they can do to feel safe? What can you do to feel safe, especially as the director in front of everybody?
Yeah. Good question. I wish I had I can send these to you if you're interested, but there's also a couple websites, like CBDNA, which is College Band Directors National Association. They're one of several companies that have helped sponsor a couple studies. I think a couple of them were both at some universities in Colorado, where they were studying aerosols specifically with musicians and how it traveled in a certain space, with and without bell covers, with and without wearing instrument masks, things like that. So there's a bunch of scenarios and a bunch of research out on that. And they pretty much found that by wearing a bell cover did help reduce things a lot. Now, of course, you're still going to have some leakage from the open keyholes and things like that. And from all the stuff I've read, there's lots of studies out in Europe too. It comes down to rotating out of the room to let the room breathe. So they suggest in around 30 minutes, no more than 30 minutes, and then let that room breathe and go to another room for a 30-minute rehearsal. And of course, having good ventilation, which I know is such a variance in schools, K through higher ed, with their systems being reliable and filtering. So that air exchange, I think, is one of the most important things in feeling safe. So if you can rehearse outside, some of the schools in the South, that's the best scenario. And I know that's what a lot of them are doing. They'll have tents set up so it protects them from the sun, and they're able to rehearse outside. We're rehearsing inside just for the first time this semester, but in small groups. So the room, the way it fits, we have 15 players and X's marked, so they're at least 6 feet apart from each other. Percussionists are required to wear face masks, and all the wind instruments are required to wear an instrument face mask, and that has like the slit in there so that they can put in their mouthpiece and still be having a face mask. And they're also required to have bell covers for their instruments. And if anybody forgets that, they're not allowed into rehearsal. We're pretty strict about it, following the COVID protocols. Some students still are not that comfortable in coming in person, so we're doing alternate assignments for them. Some are more or less doing independent studies. Some of them are composing for the first time and putting some pieces together on Band Lab. So I've been helping them with Band Lab, and so they're playing a quartet, for example, but they're the player for all 4 parts by putting it together on Band Lab, because that's a free software for them. And some others, I said another project they could do. I just came up with a menu that they could kind of pick from if they weren't comfortable coming back to school yet, that they could teach lessons to underserved school.
Oh, great idea.
Yeah, so find some schools where maybe the kids can't afford some lessons, and you're going to teach 2 lessons, a week for all semester to these kids, and we'll check in and what are some things you're learning as a teacher for the first time, and what are you learning, from your student, and so this is just a sampling of some of the projects that we're doing for those that aren't meeting in person.
Okay, can you elaborate? And I know about this because I've seen Band Lab at NAMM, but can you elaborate what exactly that is?
Well, you're asking someone who is not very good with technology. But it's and I know there's a word for it, and it's not coming to me right now, but where you can layer that audio.
A digital audio workstation.
Thank you. DAW. Thank you.
Yes.
And it's been interesting because what I have learned is you need to, if you say your name, count to 3 and clap, or do something where you clap, because you can see where you clap, and it's so much easier to line up your parts if you can do that, because even counting it doesn't help much. So that's one thing we've learned from doing that. I've found that if they play the bass line first, so let's say they pick a quartet that they're going to be playing, pick something that doesn't have a lot of rubato in it or changes of tempos. Pick something that's fairly simple. So they'll do that, and then put a click track on, so they're watching, listening to the metronome while they're playing the bass line. Then I tell them to not use a click track and use their bass line that they recorded and play along to that. So, and then usually the melodic line is the next best one to kind of stick to that. And then they can add the alto or tenor line or whichever they feel next kind of works for it. I find that works the best. And, it's been trial and error. We've figuring out some of these things, what works and doesn't work. But that was one we ended up using because it was free for the students.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see them when they first came out at NAMM. And I have not tried it personally myself, but it's interesting that you mentioned it. And I just wrote myself a note here too, and I'll put it in the show notes too. BandLab. I'm pretty sure it's bandlab.com. So
yeah, and there's an education one, I think, which is edu.bandlab or bandlab.edu.
Got it. Okay.
And that one allows a few more tools that allows you to have more control over who the student can share it with, and you can get in and create classes and yeah, it's just a little bit different.
Oh, that's great. That's an excellent resource. Gosh, there's so many more things I want to ask you, but I know we've been on for quite a while. But I do have to ask the usual standard, last question. People are always interested in. So I guess whether it's COVID or not, but in terms of your own, let's say saxophone playing and stuff like that, is there an under $100 tool that you can't live without?
Oh, well, the metronome should be everybody's tool that they can't live without.
Yes.
And the other tool, can I combine it into two, sort of?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and that's still under $100. Okay. In fact, it's probably under $20. I like the Tonal Energy Tuner app, and then with my tuning book, I've also, the engineers at Wright State have helped put that into an app now. So, and I know that the viewers can't see or whatever, but let me open this up here for you.
So you've got your iPad there, it looks like.
Yeah, can you see that sort of?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So what I'm seeing is a saxophone, kind of like a fingering chart there.
Yeah, and so this is what the app would look like if they opened it up, and you can slide along to any fingering you want, or you can slide it up here. So if you were to take, here, let's take a picture. If it's red and there's keynotes on here, they can say that that's a fingering that you want to subtract to take away. If something's green, that means you want to add it. So in this case, it's showing a D sharp. So if it says you're sharp, drop that D, that side D key there. There's options over here. Whoops. And there's another option. So if you're playing still with both those down, you can add, that finger. So the red or green. Down here, it tells the student this note can sometimes be sharp, or this is a really sharp note, or this is a flat note, et cetera, et cetera. And little tips and tricks here as to help them to play in tune and what they might be hearing. And then what I like with the Total Energy Tuner, I think I've got that up too, is this harmonic energy series. That helps, I find, too, for a student to play with good tone and in tune. So that's on if you go into the analysis part on that Tonal Energy Tuner.
Yeah, let me get to that. Hold on one second. Analysis. Okay.
And then I think you can click, let's see, where is it here? Hold on that. You could choose up here where the different wavelengths spiral. If you click on right here where
harmonic. Oh, wow.
There you go. And what's great about that is not only for tuning, but playing with good tone. For example, if you took here's where a synthetic reed, if I played a synthetic reed, even as I'm talking here, you can see this moving.
Yeah.
I wouldn't get as many overtones on a synthetic reed. I put on a cane reed, the bars will be a little bit higher and go over a little bit further because I'm able to get a little richer harmonics and resonance from it. Another good thing is with your students is play play a note, a long tone, and say, and you can actually, as I'm talking here, I don't know if it'll work if I'm singing. Well, there, it stopped one, but it'll actually freeze. You can double tap and it'll freeze what's on there, and then try to get your student to match the same harmonic resonance that you're playing with. typically, it won't be as much, and you get them to open up, get that reed vibrating a little bit more, listening rather than just letting the horn do all the work, but you're actually focusing your air, voicing a little bit differently, and they'll start to build just richer harmonics on there as well. So I think that's a great tool to use.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. Okay, so, and I've told the story before, but I'll say it again. So, I taught public school for like practically 15 years. I came out to California and I coached in a local middle school, and all the kids were saying, "Oh yeah, I use tonal energy," and I saw it, and it's like these big smiley faces. I'm like, that's not serious. Why would I use something like that? This big green smiley face. Come on, really? And so I used iStrobosoft, which is
Yeah,
this.
I have that one too, and that's what this is showing is what you've got there.
That's what I thought. This is a great app. It's like at the time I got it, God, it's like been 10 years. It's like $10 or something like that. And you can see the core of the sound. And you could see if all 4 levels are lit up. I know on the podcast you can't see this, so definitely check this out in the YouTube video that we're going to put out. But you could see all 4 levels being lit up, and that tells you have some core to the sound. And of course you want the levels to stop or be at, like right dead center in the middle at 0. So this way you know that you're in tune. The only bad thing about this app, it's very limited. It does not play the pitch for you. And the one thing I love about tonal energy, you could play the pitch. And I also found that, let me see. So it's not when you have the analysis part, but even with the tuner part of tonal energy, I just found this the other day because I just hit it by mistake, but you can get this to sound. You can actually get this to sound even in the tuner part, not just the sound wheel part. Like the sound wheel part's great because you could play a chord and sustain it, and you can make a drone there. But in the tuner part, at first I thought, oh, okay, it's just going to be like a regular tuner. But no, you could sustain the pitch you want. And this way you're hearing it. You could look away from the tuner, hear it, tune by ear, and then look and see if you're in tune or not. So this is an unbelievable app. I kick myself all the time that I didn't, I wasn't hip to this app earlier because I thought it was a kiddie thing.
Well, it's funny that you say that because at first I think that everyone's like, oh, that's just silly. But then we all love it. And I mean, I love it. I was like, yeah, I can warm up with this tuner, but nah, I need the smiley face.
I know. I teach people of all ages, and I had one woman in Germany who, smart woman, like brilliant, statistician and all that kind of stuff. And she loved this app. She's like, I live for that green smiley face.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And now if you hold it even longer in tune, the mouth will open, right? You get that big one. It's like.
And the funny thing too, they started out, if you weren't in tune, it was like this red angry face. But I think people complained, they were like, oh, it's making me feel bad. So now it's like this purple quizzical face.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh my gosh. So listen, Shelley, this has been so much fun. And people aren't aware, but beforehand, before we went on, we were just laughing. This 20 minutes just laughing, all the stuff we were coming up with. But I'm gonna encourage you, if you listen to the podcast, hey, thank you so much. It's awesome. Check out the YouTube video too, so you could see some of the stuff. Oh yeah, before we go, the other app that you mentioned. So your book, what was the book? It's Tuning Tips, right?
The tuning book is Tuning for Wind Instruments.
Yes, that's it.
And that should be on the website.
And that mentions that app?
And the apps are mentioned on the website as well. And there should be links there that'll take you to the iOS or the Android version.
That's awesome. I've not seen that app before. And I think that app is basically for pitch tendencies for.
Yeah. So essentially what the app is, I mean, in the book, it has like these charts, like here's flute, for example. And it'll go through like all the fingerings and all the inherent tendencies to the pitch and how to correct them and things like that. Clarinet, for example. So there's one you can download for directors that has all 12 instruments, or you can download, I think it's like $1.98 for just the saxophone one or the clarinet one. And clarinet, especially, like sometimes there'll be 4 or 5 different options that they can choose to fix a particular fingering, which is great. because I'm just not smart enough to have the memory to remember all those fingerings. For saxophone, you do it enough, it becomes muscle memory.
Yes.
So you're out doing honor bands or working with students, and it's like, oh, you know what, something sounds wrong there. Okay, and then you figure that out, like, oh, you know what, add this or subtract that. But then when it comes to all the other instruments, I'd be like, just a minute. I'd go look it up on the app, and I'm like, oh, there, that fixed it. Pencil that in.
That's the one advantage of playing a brass instrument. You got to use your ears, and
Yeah.
you could lip it down or tighten up or whatever.
Yeah.
For sure. That's awesome. My gosh, you've shared so many great tips and great advice. And also, although you say you're not like into the tech stuff, but a couple of things here I wasn't even aware of, which is great. I think it's going to help people a tremendous amount.
Oh, great. Well, this has been fun.
Thank you so much for being here, Shelley.
Thank you. My pleasure.